let me tell you something that happened last week that most people glossed over, and they really shouldn't have. Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, is out, gone, fired. And the way it went down, it tells you everything about how power actually works in Washington right now. Trump posted it on True Social. Because of course he did. Effective March 31st, Noem is being quietly shuffled into a brand new title, Special Envoy for the Shield of the Americas. A title, by the way, that did not exist last week. It was invented, specifically so that the word fired wouldn't have to appear in the headline. Spoiler, it appeared in every headline anyway. Now here's where it gets interesting. She isn't the first person in this administration to do something controversial. She isn't the first to face backlash, but she is the first cabinet secretary to be fired in Trump's second term. Out of everyone, and I mean everyone in this administration, she's the one who crossed the line. And what was that line exactly? Not hiding the mess well enough. So let's back up. Because to understand why she was fired, you need to understand what happened in that Senate hearing room just 2 days before Trump made the call. Senator Peter Welch of Vermont, calm, methodical, the kind of guy who does his homework before he walks into a room, sat across from Noem and started asking questions about a $143 million government contract. Not a small number, not a rounding error. $143 million of your tax money. And here's what the record shows. That money went to a company called Safe America Media, a Delaware LLC that was incorporated approximately 8 days before it received that contract. No public website, no traceable headquarters. When Democratic Representative Joe Neguse asked Noem in a separate House Judiciary hearing where Safe America Media was even based, she said she didn't know. His office couldn't find it either, but they did track down an address registered to a veteran Republican political operative named Michael Mawang. You won't believe what happened next in that hearing room. Senator Welch laid it out.
You acknowledge that?
I wasn't involved with this contracting process, so my understanding is that there was many companies that competed for this contract.
The answer to that is yes or no.
I don't believe it was. I believe other companies competed for this because there was 2 different vendors that were chosen.
I have here a document from usspending.gov. And this document specifically states the justification for no bid contract that goes to Safe America Media and People Who Think. Those are the 2 entities that did the campaign, correct?
I believe it is. I wasn't a part of this contracting process.
Let's get serious here.
Yes.
Okay. Make the Safe America was incorporated 11 days or 7 days by my count before they got an award of $143 million. You have any dispute with that?
Are you talking about the subcontractor on that contract?
No,
because we have
Safe America.
Senator, I wasn't a part of this decision.
Okay.
We followed the same processes that have been our policies and how this was conducted appropriately.
I will go through this and then you can answer. I don't want us to be talking over each other. Safe America was incorporated 11 days or 7 days by my account before they got a $143 million contract. Now, as an administrator who has fiscal responsibility over a huge budget, do you realistically think that a company that was created 11 days before they got $143 million is in a position to execute on a $143 million contract?
Senator, I can't speak to their business model. I will tell you that since I've been at the department, I have reviewed over 10,000 contracts.
Okay,
I have saved the taxpayers over $13 billion
I want to go through this,
by
Madam
renegotiating
Secretary.
contracts and being more efficient.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want the filibuster, all right? And I want my time back. I'm not denying her a chance to answer. I'm asking you to deny her the abuse to filibuster. Okay.
Of that.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll go through this, all right? This is on a U.S. government website that says that contract for $143 million was a no-bid contract. Public documentation says the contract of $143 million went to the Safe America company, created 11 days before they got an award. That company then subcontracted with the strategy group, and you are familiar with many of the principals in the strategy group, correct?
I know one of them,
Mr. Yoho.
yes.
And let me show you a photograph. That's Mr. Yoho standing next to you, correct?
Yes,
Now, Mr. Yoho is also the husband of your former spokesperson. Is that correct?
correct.
Tricia McLaughlin.
Yes,
So your former assistant secretary and her husband are the ones that got the subcontract from Safe America, or from Safe America. That's what the record shows. Any dispute about that?
no, except there was no politicals, myself or anyone else besides career employees who are a part of that process.
Except
for putting out those
Well,
contracts and
that's
choosing
generous.
those vendors.
But what you have is the Republican operative.
Well, you're trying to insinuate that
I'm not
I put
insinuating,
my-
I'm
Yes,
stating a
you're-
fact. The fact is
You're saying that I
Mr.
weighed in on this
Yoho-
contracting
Mis-
process, and I did not.
Mr. Chairman, the fact is that Mr. Yoho was married to your assistant secretary, is married, correct?
Yes, they are still married.
All right. And Mr. Yoho also ran an ad campaign for you in your gubernatorial campaign, correct?
Yes,
And he also attended your inauguration.
yes,
And Mr. Yoho received $8.5 million, or his company did, from the taxpayers of South Dakota when you ran an ad promotion showing you doing various jobs, like a plumber and a dentist, correct?
again, that was done according to the law and processes at the state of South
I
Dakota.
understand, but
Yes,
this
well-
is a person that worked on your campaign. This is a person that worked on your media plan in South Dakota when you were governor, and this is a person who also worked on your memoir. Is that correct?
On my memoir?
And he worked with Mr. Lewandowski. Is that correct?
I don't know, sir. I don't know about the business
Mr.
arrangements they've had in the
Lewandowski
past.
is your special advisor.
Special government employee.
Right.
For the White
And
House.
Mr. Lewandowski brought Mr. Yoho into your camp. They had worked on the Louisiana governor's campaign, correct?
No, I knew Ben Yoho before that.
All right. So the person that you knew, Mr. Yoho, the husband of your assistant secretary, is the person in the company that got the subcontract 11 days after this original company, Safe America, was founded. That's the record. So I have a question. Did Mr. Lewandowski receive any compensation directly or indirectly from Safe America or from the strategy group?
Senator, I don't have any information to that. I can't speak to that.
Would that be of interest
think so.
for you to find out?
Sure.
Well, so will you ask Mr. Lewandowski, did he get any compensation directly or indirectly from these contracts?
Are you asking me to go ask him?
Yes, I am. Ask your special government advisor,
I can do that.
and you'll get back to us.
Get back to you. Yes,
All right,
absolutely.
we will want
Piece
that.
by piece, document by document, like a prosecutor who actually read the file. Safe America Media, formed barely a week before it won the contract, then subcontracted that work to a political consulting firm called the Strategy Group. And who runs the Strategy Group? A man named Ben Yoho. Who is Ben Yoho? He is the husband of Noem's own former spokesperson, Tricia McLaughlin, who also happened to be the assistant secretary running the DHS office that approved the contracts in the first place. Let that web sink in for a second. The company that got the money was brand new. The subcontractor who actually did the work was run by the husband of the woman who ran the office that approved the deal. And the secretary herself, she sat there and said, under oath, I wasn't involved in this contracting process. Here's my take on that. Whether or not she personally made a phone call, the system around her was built by people she knew, for people she knew, and it worked exactly the way someone designed it to work. Do you think this is a win for the people? Let me know in the comments. Now let's talk about what Noem actually said in that hearing room, because her defense strategy is something I want you to really pay attention to. Senator Welch asked her a straightforward question. Was this a no-bid contract? Simple yes or no. And Noem's response? She said, I wasn't involved with this contracting process. My understanding is that many companies competed for this contract. Welch then pulled out a document, a real one, from usaspending.gov, the federal government's own public contracting database. And that document specifically states the justification for a no-bid contract going directly to Safe America Media. Here's where it gets interesting. When Welch pushed further, Noem shifted her answer. Suddenly, it wasn't many companies competed. It became, I believe other companies competed because there were two different vendors chosen. Two vendors, both connected to her political circle. That's not competition. That's a casting call where you already know who got the part. And then came the moment that honestly stopped me cold. Welch walked her through the timeline again. Slowly. Clearly. Safe America Media incorporated 11 days before receiving a $143 million contract. He asked her directly, do you realistically think a company created 11 days before they got $143 million is in a position to execute on that contract? Her answer? Senator, I can't speak to their business model. Can't speak to their business model. $148 million of taxpayer money, and the person with fiscal responsibility over one of the largest departments in the federal government cannot speak to whether a brand new, no website, no history company is even capable of doing the job. Here's what that actually means in plain English. A company that young has no staff infrastructure, no proven delivery record, no established vendor relationships, the only thing it had was the right connections. And in Washington, apparently, that's enough. Now let's talk about Corey Lewandowski, because this is the part that makes everything else make sense. During the hearing, Welch asked Noem point blank, did Lewandowski receive any compensation, directly or indirectly, from Safe America or the strategy group? And Noem said, Senator, I don't have any information on that. Then she offered to go ask him. Go. Ask. Him. Like he's a coworker she hasn't checked in with lately. But here's what she didn't tell that committee, and what ProPublica published the very next morning in what I can only describe as a bombshell. In a separate hearing on the same day, Senator Blumenthal asked Noem directly whether Lewandowski had any role in approving contracts at DHS. And she said, under oath, no, except internal DHS records reviewed by ProPublica tell a completely different story. Those records show Lewandowski personally approved at least one multi-million-dollar equipment contract at the agency. And it wasn't a one-time thing. Multiple current and former DHS officials told ProPublica that Lewandowski's signature is typically the last name on the internal approval checklist before contracts reach Noem, who, as of June 2025, required her own personal sign-off on every DHS contract over $100,000. So let's be precise about what that means. The man she told Congress had no role in contracts was, according to internal records, the final approver before her on the contract chain. Every single time. That's not a miscommunication. That's not forgetting a detail under pressure. That is a direct contradiction between sworn testimony and documented internal government records. And here's the detail about Lewandowski's actual role at DHS that reveals just how deep this goes. Axios and CNN both reported extensively that Lewandowski, officially classified as an unpaid special government employee, a designation legally capped at 130 days per year, has been functioning as the effective chief of staff at DHS for over a year. One senior administration official told Axios directly, Kristi is the face of DHS, Corey is the brains. He directed firings. He put employees on administrative leave. He signed off on billions in FEMA grant funding. And according to CNN, he was one of the people who fired then FEMA Administrator Cameron Hamilton, the day after Hamilton testified before Congress that he did not believe it was in the best interests of the American people to eliminate FEMA. That's what happens when you tell the truth in this administration. Do you think someone this deep in the system should be required to disclose his finances publicly? Let me know in the comments, because that question matters more than most people realize. Let's zoom out for a second, because there's a legal dimension to this story that nobody is talking about. Loudly enough, and I think you deserve to understand it. The justification used to skip competitive bidding on these contracts wasn't just a bureaucratic checkbox. It has a specific name in federal law. It's called FAR Part 6432 to poll, which covers something known as unusual and compelling urgency. Sounds serious, right? Like a national security emergency. Like something that genuinely couldn't wait. Here's where it gets interesting. That urgency exemption exists for real emergencies. A natural disaster. A sudden national security threat. Something that genuinely cannot wait for the standard competitive bidding process. It is, by the federal government's own rules, supposed to be a rare exception, not a standing invitation to hand 9-figure contracts to companies that didn't exist last month. And here's the part that federal acquisition regulations make crystal clear. That urgency authority cannot legally be used if the reason for the emergency is a lack of advanced planning by the agency itself. Read that again. You cannot manufacture an emergency by simply failing to plan ahead, and then use that manufactured emergency to justify skipping competition. That's not a loophole. That's explicitly prohibited. So what was the urgent national emergency that justified $143 million in no-bid contracts? An advertising campaign featuring Kristi Noem on horseback at Mount Rushmore, filmed. And I want you to hold this detail in your mind on October 2nd, 2024, the second day of the government shutdown. While federal workers were being sent home without pay, while government services were being suspended, the DHS was on location at a national monument filming a cabinet secretary on a horse for what was functionally a political media campaign and calling it a national emergency to justify the billing. I've seen smaller productions at regional theater companies that still had to put out a competitive bid. Now, the DHS defense, and they did offer one, is that the ad campaign caused 2.2 million people to self-deport and saved taxpayers $39 billion. That's the number they're standing behind. And look, if that's true, that's a policy outcome worth examining seriously. But here's the question that number doesn't answer. If this was genuinely urgent national security work, why did it look exactly like a political media campaign? Why were the vendors the same people who had worked on Noem's gubernatorial campaign in South Dakota? Why did Ben Yoho, the subcontractor whose company got millions, also run ad campaigns for Noem when she was governor, attend her inauguration, and work on her memoir? That's not a coincidence. That's a contact list. And speaking of South Dakota, this isn't the first time this pattern appeared. When Noem was governor, Yoho's company received $8.5 million from South Dakota taxpayers for an ad campaign showing Noem doing various jobs. Plumber, dentist, the works. Senator Welch brought this up directly in the hearing. Noem acknowledged it. Her defense was that it was done according to the law and processes at the state. Maybe it was, but here's what a pattern looks like. Same political ally, same media vendor, same structure. First at the state level, then scaled up to the federal government with a budget 10 times larger and oversight 10 times weaker. Here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. House Oversight Committee ranking member Robert Garcia flags something that should be getting far more attention. Lewandowski, the man effectively running DHS day to day, appears to have exceeded his legal 130-day annual limit as a special government employee. And critically, he has failed to publicly release the financial disclosures that federal ethics rules require for someone exercising his level of authority. Those disclosures matter. They would show exactly what business interests Lewandowski holds while he's sitting at the top of the DHS contract approval chain. As of this hearing, they still have not been released. Lewandowski has declined to say whether he receives any outside income or from whom. Government ethics expert Richard Painter, who served as the chief White House ethics lawyer under President George W. Bush, not exactly a member of any resistance movement, told reporters that Lewandowski's role at DHS raises serious problems with the special government employee structure. Painter's exact words, "If you supervise other people, I don't think you really are a legitimate special government employee." And that's the thing. We've been asking this question for over a year, and Lewandowski has now been reapproved for another 130-day term at DHS in 2026. The question hasn't been answered. The disclosures haven't been filed. And the clock keeps running. the Project on Government Oversight's General Counsel, Scott Ami, said publicly that the entire arrangement is, and I'm paraphrasing carefully here, worthy of a full investigation to determine whether these decisions were made legally and without bias. That's a nonpartisan government watchdog saying they aren't even sure this was legal. Do you think the financial disclosure should be made public immediately? Because I do, and I think most Americans, regardless of party, would agree. Let me know in the comments. Here's something that didn't make the headlines loudly enough, and I want to fix that right now. Because what Senator Welch uncovered in that hearing room wasn't just about one bad contract, it was about something much bigger. It was about whether the entire contracting system at one of America's most powerful federal agencies was quietly rewired from the inside to make sure the money flowed in one specific direction. Let me break down exactly how that system worked. Noem spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin ran the DHS office that approved the contracts. McLaughlin's husband, Ben Yoho, ran the strategy group, the political consulting firm that received the subcontract from Safe America Media. And Corey Lewandowski, the man functioning as effective chief of staff, was sitting at the top of the internal approval chain, signing off before contracts reached Noem's desk. Here's where it gets interesting. Nobody needed to make a phone call. Nobody needed to leave a paper trail. Because when the person approving the contracts is married to the person receiving the subcontract, and the person at the top of the approval chain is an undisclosed political operative with potential financial interests in the outcome, you don't need explicit instructions. The system already knows what to do. That's not bureaucratic slippage. That's system design. And here's the financial picture that should make every taxpayer genuinely angry. Under Noem's leadership, DHS tripled its advertising budget. According to Bloomberg, that's $220 million of your money, spent on ads that prominently featured the cabinet secretary herself, awarded without competitive bidding, to companies connected to her personal and political network, some of which appear to have been created specifically to receive those contracts. Think about that framing for a second. The government's own advertising budget, meant to serve public information purposes, was tripled under the leadership of the person who personally appeared in the ads, produced by vendors connected to her political career, approved through a process that bypassed standard competition. That's the government equivalent of your contractor friend telling you he knows a great roofing company, and then giving you his own home address as theirs. Now, here's the part that ProPublica confirmed, and this detail is critical. Subcontractors are not required to be disclosed in federal contracting databases, which means that when Safe America Media received $143 million and passed the bulk of that work downstream to the strategy group and potentially other entities, that money effectively disappeared into what ProPublica described as an untraceable dark money network. The full accounting of where that $143 million went still does not exist in any public federal database. Not partially missing, not hard to find, simply not there. And I want to be precise about what that means practically. When Senator Welch asked Noem whether Lewandowski received any compensation from Safe America or the strategy group, she said she'd go ask him. But the structure of these contracts, with undisclosed subcontractors and no public spending trail, means that even if she asked, even if he answered, there is currently no independent mechanism to verify the answer. The system wasn't just used to move money. It was structured in a way that made the movement of that money permanently difficult to trace. Here's where it gets even more serious. Republican Senator Thom Tillis, not a Democrat, not a media critic, a Republican, called Noem's leadership of DHS a disaster at the same hearing and stated he had called for her resignation. Republican Senator John Kennedy, and if you know John Kennedy's record, you know he is nobody's idea of a liberal firebrand, told Noem directly that the spending troubles me. When John Kennedy is troubled by government spending on your watch, you have lost the room entirely. And then came the moment that I think actually sealed her fate, not with the public, but with Trump personally. According to reporting from CBS News, after the hearing, Trump called Senator Kennedy personally, and Kennedy told CBS that Trump said his recollection and Noem's recollection of their conversation about the ad campaign are different. Think carefully about what that means. Noem's last remaining defense, the one argument that could have potentially shielded her from full accountability, was that the president himself had approved the whole operation, that Trump knew about the ad campaign, knew about the spending, and signed off on it. And Trump, in a private phone call to a Republican senator, just walked away from that defense entirely. She didn't just lose her job, she lost her alibi. At the same time, from the same person, there's also something else that deserves a mention here, because the $143 million contract wasn't the only controversy on Newman's record at DHS. She and Lewandowski made the decision together to suspend TSA pre-check during the government shutdown, a move so chaotic that the White House had to step in and reverse it directly. She publicly called 2 American citizens killed by federal agents in Minneapolis, Renee Grotha and Alex Price, domestic terrorists. She refused to apologize even as investigations into their deaths remained open. Nearly 190 members of Congress co-sponsored articles of impeachment against her, and through all of that, Trump kept her. It was the hearing room that did it. It was the moment she couldn't explain where the money went, couldn't name the company, couldn't account for the timeline, and did it all on camera in front of the Senate in a way that made the administration look exactly as exposed as it actually is. Do you think Trump fired her to protect himself or to protect the American people? Because those are 2 very different things. Let me know in the comments. Let's talk about what this moment actually means, because I don't want you to walk away from this story thinking it ends with 1 firing and 1 made-up job title. It doesn't. Noem is gone. But Corey Lewandowski is still there, still functioning as the effective chief of staff at DHS, still without filed financial disclosures, still reapproved for another 130-day term in 2026. Still, as far as any public record shows, the last signature on the internal contract approval chain before spending decisions were finalized. Here's where it gets interesting. The next Secretary of Homeland Security, the person who will now inherit this department, these contracts, this approval structure, and these unanswered questions, is a former MMA fighter from Oklahoma who Trump described in the firing announcement as a mega warrior. I'm not editorializing. That's the exact phrase used in the official announcement. So let's be honest about what the transition actually looks like. The person accused of overseeing a system where $143 million flowed to an 8-day-old company with no public footprint has been removed. The person who, according to internal DHS records, was personally approving contracts while telling Congress he had no such role, remains. And the incoming secretary arrives not with a background in federal law enforcement, emergency management, or government contracting, but with a description that emphasizes political loyalty above everything else. That's not a reform. That's a rotation. And here's what I think is the most important thing to understand about this entire story. Something that gets lost when we focus on the individual personalities involved. The question was never really whether Kristi Noem personally picked up the phone and said give the contract to Ben Yoho's company. That's almost beside the point. The deeper question, the one that Senator Welch was actually building toward in that hearing room, is whether a system was deliberately constructed to make that phone call unnecessary. Think about it structurally. You have a spokesperson who runs the office that funds the contracts. You have that spokesperson's husband running the subcontractor that receives the work. You have a political operative, officially unpaid, officially temporary, sitting at the top of the approval chain without disclosed financial interests. And you have a justification mechanism, the urgency exemption, that can be applied to virtually anything if nobody is watching closely enough. A system like that doesn't need instructions. It runs on shared understanding. And the only way you see it clearly is when someone like Senator Welch walks into a room with the actual documents and refuses to accept "I wasn't involved" as a complete answer. Here's where it gets really uncomfortable. ProPublica's investigation, published the morning after the hearing, didn't just contradict Noem's testimony. It revealed something structural about how oversight itself has been quietly disabled. When the person approving contracts doesn't have to disclose their financial interest, when subcontractors don't have to appear in federal spending databases, when the urgency exemption can be invoked for a horseback photo shoot, the individual mechanisms of accountability, the ones specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of arrangement, are not now functioning randomly. They are being used against their own purpose. Federal ethics rules exist for a reason. Competitive bidding requirements exist for a reason. Financial disclosure requirements for special government employees exist for a reason. And when each of those requirements is either bypassed, ignored, or technically satisfied while being functionally undermined, the result isn't just one bad contract. The result is that you genuinely cannot tell from the outside where the public money is going. And that, more than any single dollar figure, is what should keep you up at night. Let me give you a concrete example of the scale we're actually talking about. DHS is not a small agency. It has a budget in the hundreds of billions. It has more than 250,000 employees. It oversees border security, disaster response, cybersecurity, and aviation safety. When a secretary of that department can sit before the United States Senate and say, "I wasn't involved, I can't speak to their business model," I'll go ask him. Without any apparent fear of consequence, what exactly is congressional oversight accomplishing? Senator Welch asked precisely the right questions. He had the right documents. He made the right record. And 2 days later, Noem was fired. Not because Congress held her accountable, but because Trump decided she had become an embarrassment. That distinction matters enormously, because accountability and embarrassment are not the same thing. Accountability means the system caught a problem and corrected it through established processes, investigation, consequence, reform. Embarrassment means someone became too visible at the wrong moment and got quietly moved to a title that didn't exist last Tuesday. Noem didn't face a congressional consequence. She didn't face a legal consequence. She faced a political optics consequence. And even that came wrapped in a consolation prize and a farewell statement from Trump, saying she served us well. He did not mention the $143 million. He did not mention the company formed 8 days before the contract. He did not mention the internal records that contradict her sworn testimony. Do you think firing Noem actually fixes anything? Or does it just change the face on the same broken system? I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop it in the comments. Here's where everything lands. And I want to give you my honest analysis, not just a summary. Because summaries are easy. Understanding what this moment actually means for the country going forward. That's the harder conversation, and I think you deserve to have it. Let's start with what we know for certain. Senator Welch has formally requested the DHS Inspector General to investigate the contracts. The House Oversight Committee has been demanding Lewandowski's financial disclosures for months, and those disclosures still have not been filed. ProPublica has now published internal records that directly contradict Noem's sworn Senate testimony, and the full accounting of where that $143 million actually went still does not exist in any public federal database. Those are not allegations. Those are documented facts sitting in the public record right now. Here's where it gets interesting. Noem is being shipped off to something called Special Envoy for the Shield of the Americas, a title invented last weekend, announced at a Trump resort in Doral, Florida, because, of course it was, a job created specifically so that the word fired wouldn't have to appear in the official announcement. It appeared in every headline anyway. And Lewandowski? Still there. Still unsigned disclosures. Still reapproved. Still the last name on the contract approval chain at one of the most powerful agencies in the federal government. Now, here's my analysis. And I want to be clear, this is my take based on everything we've walked through together over these past segments. What happened at DHS under Noem's tenure was not a series of isolated mistakes. It was not bureaucratic incompetence. Incompetence is random. Incompetence doesn't consistently route money toward the same political network through the same approval structure, using the same emergency justification over and over again. What the documented record shows is something more deliberate, a system architected to concentrate spending authority in the hands of people with undisclosed interests, while simultaneously removing the paper trails that would make those interests visible. That's not an accident. That's a design choice. Here's where it gets even more significant for what comes next. The incoming DHS secretary, a political loyalist with no background in federal emergency management or government contracting, is walking into a department where the existing approval infrastructure remains largely intact. Lewandowski is still there. The subcontractor disclosure gap in federal spending databases still exists. The urgency exemption that was used to justify no-bid contracts on ad campaigns is still available to anyone who wants to use it. Firing Noem without addressing any of those structural issues doesn't fix the problem. It just gives the problem a new face. And here's what I genuinely believe will happen next. Based on the pattern this administration has demonstrating consistently, the Inspector General investigation Senator Welch requested will move slowly. Lewandowski's financial disclosures will continue to be delayed without formal legal consequence. The ProPublica contradictions between Noem's sworn testimony and internal DHS records will not result in a perjury referral, because making that referral would require the Justice Department to investigate conduct that implicates people still inside the administration, and the $140 million will remain in practical terms unaccounted for in any public database. What should happen, and I want to be direct about this, is a full, independent, bipartisan investigation, not an Inspector General review that can be quietly shelved. A proper congressional investigation with subpoena authority, compelled financial disclosures, and public hearings that go beyond the 7 minutes Senator Welch was given. Lewandowski should be required to file his financial disclosures immediately or be removed from his position entirely. The urgency exemption used to justify these contracts should be formally reviewed by the Government Accountability Office. And Safe America Media's full subcontracting chain, every dollar, every vendor, every approval signature, should be entered into the public federal spending record. Will any of that happen? Based on the current composition of Congress and the current posture of this administration toward oversight, honestly, probably not at the speed or scale the situation demands. But here's what I think matters most in the long run. Senator Welch sat in that room with 7 minutes and a stack of public documents, and he made a record that cannot be erased. ProPublica published an investigation the morning after the hearing that placed internal government records directly against sworn congressional testimony. Richard Painter, the Republican ethics lawyer, went on record. The Project on Government Oversight went on record. Republican Senators Kennedy and Tillis went on record. The record exists, and records have a way of mattering. Sometimes immediately, sometimes years later, in ways that aren't always visible in the moment they're made. Here's my final thought on all of this. Kristi Noem was not fired because the system worked. She was fired because she became too embarrassing too publicly at too inconvenient a moment. That is a meaningful distinction. A system that corrects itself through embarrassment rather than accountability is a system that will keep producing the same outcomes with different names attached to them. The $143 million is still missing. Lewandowski still hasn't filed his disclosures. The new DHS secretary is already being described in terms of political loyalty rather than institutional competence. And somewhere in a Delaware LLC registry, Safe America Media still exists. Formed 8 days before it received a federal contract worth more than most Americans will earn in 10 lifetimes. Everything is fine. Except, and I mean this seriously, it isn't. And the fact that we've normalized the level of institutional opacity that would have been considered a 5-alarm scandal 15 years ago is itself the story underneath the story. The people running these agencies are counting on your attention span being shorter than their paper trails. Don't let it be. Do you think real accountability is still possible in this political environment? Or has the system become too broken to self-correct? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this breakdown gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to see it. Because the only thing more powerful than a well-hidden paper trail is enough people who refuse to stop looking.